when I was invited to the Tingley Museum to make a piece around the 60 years of, the past 60 years of Swiss performance art. And I said, I'm not really interested, I mean, they've inspired me a lot, but I'm not really interested in working on that theme. I'd rather work on what will the next 60 years look like. So I thought, okay, I'll project myself into 60 years in the future, imagine what performance art might be. And I was like, okay, smart watches, smart fridges, smart coffee machines. So all these smart machines are going to become so smart that they'll have existential crisis. And they'll have existential crisis of their own. So they'll need their own philosophy, their own art to cope with it. So they'll have their own shows of machines for machines. And then I thought they'd probably collaborate with humans anyway, so we'd have this mixed hybrid human-machine art, but aimed to the particular existential crisis of the machines. It's like, okay, fun. Looking back from that point to 2017, I was like, what started it? And then I built that. That was a cubic robot called Dai, which was on 3 axes, could move around and was learning. So it started from nothing, and it was learning to move through sensors and everything. As we taught, I'm not going to go too much into detail on that because it could take forever in this conversation, but I mean, if you have questions later, we can chat about that too. But that bot got me into AI, and as we were touring it, we actually toured it in India a bit too, I realized that people, like, it was a 5-minute contextualization, a 15-minute performance of the learning robot. I mean, for me, I was fascinated that machines could learn. For me, that was the beginning. These are learning machines, and for me, this was the beginning of something completely different. I was like, okay, this is fascinating. And I wanted to build one, right? And then with the conversations afterwards, I mean, the conversation just went on for like 45 minutes or so. People had endless questions about AI, and most people were saying, I don't do technology, I'm not a technologist, I can't join in that conversation. And it struck me as something terrible, because I was talking to a lot of people by that time. I mean, when I started, for me, AI was Terminator, right? Skynet and all these things. And as I started talking to people, I found that, you know, AI already existed in finance. They were using AI algorithms, and they were already like replacing not jobs or people, but tasks. And if you replace enough tasks in a company, then you don't need so many people. And the people that you fire are the people who will be the least likely to learn how to work with these new tools. So older people, or just, yeah, I guess also expensive people, you know, I mean, all of this. So you think, okay, these people, when they lose their jobs, they'll have much difficulty finding another job because they won't be equipped to, and they're exactly the wrong people to deal with that type of problem. So precarity. And I was like, okay, so this really is a conversation where everybody should join in. The whole, I mean, every layer of society, every country on the world should join into this conversation. And we can't keep it to politicians, large tech companies, technologists, technocrats, because otherwise we're doomed, was my thought. So as I chatted to somebody about that, we decided to found a small AI festival residency. We ran that for a few years, where we'd invite non-technological artists to work on the questions around AI arriving in society and create non-technological art, mostly, so that people could relate to it. When you relate to a screen, it's a bit different than when you relate to an actual physical sculpture or a painting. And so we thought that this would bring more people into the conversation and to understand that the topics. Oh yeah, and we also invited philosophers, anthropologists, psychologists, engineers to have this kind of conversation, like just general conversations about where they were, what their thoughts were about, you know, society and how AI and technologies in general arrived, and how that would disrupt and what we could do about it. I mean, we had people from the church, we had people from the army, we had people from all sorts of spaces join in these conversations. And hopefully it helped a few people understand that they could, you know, they could actually, it was vital that they joined in the conversation. For that, we decided that we needed, because this is now 2020, right? So it's still a year before ChatGPT existed or something. And I mean, my brother's a smart engineer, and he was already thinking multimodal AI, and we were working on that as the next brain for the robot and stuff. And I said, like, okay, let's add a chat so we can interact with this non-human entity. Because by that time I was thinking, this seems like it's going to be the first time in humanity that we have tools that we might be able to collaborate with. And I wanted us to explore that as well as a question, like what does that mean, collaborating with a non-human entity? And then, as I say these words, I'm thinking, oh, but there are so many more non-human entities than AI, like who we already don't know how to collaborate with or how to interact properly with or even how to live next to or with. And I thought, okay, fine, so this is great. We'll explore all of these themes. So we had all sorts of artwork around AI, mushrooms, root knowledge systems, and it was quite fascinating few years around that. So that's basically where I come from in this conversation.
Great, thank you. Super interesting. My journey with what I'm doing is I have been working for the last 20 odd years in India, primarily in three kind of like worlds which are interconnected. One of them is a studio called Quicksand, which is based out of Delhi and Goa and Bangalore. We're essentially a human-centered design firm, and we do a lot of design research and ethnography and try to work a lot with kind of inputs from the social sciences and combine that with design and creative practice. We mostly work in the development sector and or the social impact sector, as you would call it, and work in far-flung domains, everything from suicide prevention for young people in India to malnutrition or to financial services and so on and so forth. The second part of what I do is relating to creating communities. So we run something called Unbox, and this space at Sadhana Del Art is a manifestation of that kind of a world, which is essentially trying to create spaces for small communities or micro communities, as we would like to call them, in India, but specifically in this case in Goa, and trying to, for example, a day like this where we're trying to bring together people from different walks of life and connected and adjacent to research and creative practice, and try to create situations by which we can think about the world in a slightly more expanded manner. And in this avatar of my work, we do festivals, residencies, spaces, of course, exhibitions, labs, and so on and so forth, a whole bunch of things. And then the third thing I do is I have an independent practice in terms of me trying to be an artist over the last some years. And I've been fortunate to be in the Indian sort of electronic music scene for since a long time, where I started off as a visual jockey, which for people who don't know, visual jockey or a VJ is someone who plays visuals with music. So this could be in music festivals, could be in galleries, could be in nightclubs, could be on the street, could be wherever. So I've been doing that for a while, and that led me a lot deeper into digital practice. And through that, I've been making video games. So some of the work in this room, all this is my stuff. That's artists I worked with. That's some old artwork from I don't know, when I was in my late 20s or something. But early kind of work with 3D softwares and kind of composition. These are for example, based on a trip to Florence and looking at the ceilings in Florence at the Uffizi kind of museums, and trying to kind of think about a more electronic sort of version of that kind of idea. That one, for example, is from a project from our which is looking at speculative history of technology in India, and looking at a time or proposing that there were many epochs, so to speak, and many different eras in the past in the Indian subcontinent, so to speak, where people were creating all kinds of contraptions that help them visualize and imagine the world in a different way. So that guy over there is a king, for example, who created these virtual reality devices and so on back in the day in the 17th century or whatever. And then over there at the back is an artwork from the video game that I've been working on for many years, and that's looking at a kind of a colonial India where a mother and a son are traveling through India, trying to find these mechatronic kind of contraptions which have a sense of artificial life inside them and which have sentience inside them. And through that, they're trying to do it before the Britishers can get the technology, basically, of making these kind of automatons move and create music. So that's a Shehnai, for example, or a Nadaswaram from the south, essentially. So this is kind of, in some sense, a bit piece of the world that I've been working in. And there is a recurring theme of technology and technology futures or speculative technologies in my work since I was quite young. And in some sense, working with AI is a natural extension of things that I was always thinking about, of how machines work with human beings. And how we can look at a more positive aspect of what that collaboration means, and also quite importantly that the reason to experiment with technologies, like in the case of this guy or the automaton or this stuff, is to kind of create music and create visuals and to create experiences which are around that, right? And not about like world conquest or not about like, doing some great things, but except like enjoying yourself as an individual, and appreciating different ways in which you can connect with the world around you. So in some sense, so when AI came along in the recent years, for me it was quite a natural extension of all these things I described. I mean, one, being a being a VJ, again, for some, let's say some of the folks here might not be familiar. In the early days of VJing, like let's say in the early 2000s and that time, there was no internet as well, right? Very bad internet in India. But globally, and as the internet came, we were able to download like films without permission, have pirated softwares. Like I think everyone in this room, not everyone here maybe, but most people would have gone through that era of going to Nehru Place if you were in Delhi and buying fake software, Palika Bazaar, and then LimeWire for the music aficionados, like Napster and all this stuff, right? And it's important to, and so for me, and so coming back to VJing at that point was a lot about like sampling and resampling, like DJing back in the day, right? So finding some cool videos from somewhere, putting it in a nightclub, putting it with music, and like showing how cool you are by the kind of things that you can dig out from the world, which it's not like popular movies or something. It's like could be some hyper experimental surrealist film from the Czech Republic from the 1970s, or it could be some strange videos from Nigeria on a trip that I picked up, some CDs with some shamanistic kind of like sitcoms and soap operas like they're in Nigeria, if you're familiar with that culture over there, or media. And so a lot of it was like resampling and sampling. And then as time changed, corporations stepped in, stopped the piracy, stopped the remixing. A lot of like culture around art developed around digital art, where it was wrong to sample stuff because that means that you're stealing something or you're not being original. But I think, so I've been through that whole journey where now we don't really sample anything in the clubs because you can get into trouble if you put something, or somebody will put it on Instagram, say this guy, this is not his work, he's showing something. But so you adapt as an artist, but I think something very essential has been lost out, and which is in its very pure form in the 70s and 80s for music and 90s and 2000s for video, is that sampling is the same thing as standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Sampling is the same as like building your knowledge repository by being in a library when you're growing up and copying all these things and imitating like art and then being an artist, like, which is the natural way of progression for most artists in the world, I would say. But that journey kind of reflects this idea that, and where we are today with AI in some sense, is that we're back in the age of piracy. We're back in the wild, wild west of the digital world where anybody can steal from anybody can make anything. And there are systems and corporations that allow you to do it by paying a subscription, right?
There's a difference though, yeah, because there's a subscription.
Yeah, there's of course, but
this big company is making a lot of money.
The thing that is basically AI is also basically just sampling stuff.
Absolutely. Like my definition of AI is not artificial intelligence, it's archival intelligence, and that's so our project, and I'll show you a few things around our project elsewhere in India, which looks at AI being archival intelligence, because that's all it is,
yes.
And that's all it can be, right? It can only be that.
It can augment. It cannot.
Yeah, and it can only pull from what's around us, and we live in this world, so everything is archives in some sense, right? It's not artificial, so to speak. The actual artificial intelligence comes maybe, let's say 10, 15 years from now, when everything is building off a synthetic media that was archival, that was based on the archives, right? And there's an interstitial moment that we're kind of entering right now. But absolutely, the corporations have a subscription, but it's interesting for me because there was a time when you could do this freely. Then there was a time when you get into trouble if you do it, and now there's a subscription for $20, and you can just do it the best way you've ever done.
Which is insane because
yeah, it is.
It's making money. Like there's open source versions of these AIs, right? There's the models. There's open source models which are actually giving it back to the artists to use as they want. So for me, that's kind of okay.
But some capitalist organization makes money of even open source, because open source depends on great graphic cards. That's NVIDIA.
Fine.
Cloud depends on something else.
Capitalism is always going to be the main
problem. Of course. There are brands behind everything right now.
It's actually the main problem of everything when you think about it.
But to add to your point, that there is indeed a brand behind every aspect of AI. And that is what fundamentally also makes it different from an age of piracy where you were literally, there was basically a counterculture against brands, and piracy built in a way to diffuse brand ecosystems. But today, the new kind of piracy actually builds those brand ecosystems, and we're stuck in this loop, and that's the loop we've been invited to be stuck in, basically.
Yeah. I think what grates me is when companies like OpenAI, not OpenAI, but take the stuff and then sell it back. Like suddenly we have to pay a subscription to get our stuff back, you know? Like, but they can just take it. These are internet laws actually, which made that possible. Like search engine laws that were written so that search engines could have the right to temporarily take a file, index it, so we could use like Google, Yahoo, and whatever. And so AI is just like piggybacking on those laws because they're just taking it temporarily, training a model and not keeping it. That's why it was possible. But I think like they can't sell it back to us. I mean, this is a big problem because it changes who has access, right? Like now you have free AI, which is not super. Then you have $20 a month AI, which is better. And then you have $100 or $200 a month AI, which is up there, like it does stuff. And you can actually use it. And suddenly there's a gap, like who has access to this, who has the money, and what spaces. So basically, all the artists who don't have that money will just have their stuff used, you know, to train these models, or all the people basically, but they won't be able to afford to pay for it to get it back, you know. And I think there's a big problem about this. There's another problem, obviously, is like just generally who has access to intelligence, because that's what's happening, right? Intelligence is becoming cheap, I guess, or cheaper in a way. Like, I mean, worthless by cheap. I mean, like human intelligence is losing value with the rise of the functioning AIs, and so if this loses value, but somebody still finds a way to build a moat around it, so only some people have access. Basically, we're just widening the gap in between the rich and the rest of the world, and I think that's going to be a big problem in the future with AI. But
I mean,
capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about access a bit. I think because I mean, and you're right about that, because often when we show work that's made with AI, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit more as well. This question of access in any kind of intelligent forum like it is today, or a more kind of evolved forum, for example, there would always be this question of access from the audience. There would always be this question of access from, say, a social science researcher or someone who's working with the kind of the rest of India, as they would call it, right? And I think it's super important because India, I mean, maybe you're not familiar with it because, you know, in some sense, for a lot of the people here, we've all seen the rise of like educational technologies, or edtech as they would call it, right? In India, especially when you talk about access in like schools, there's been since the early 2000s, I'm guessing, a lot of programs which send out like technologies to classrooms, technologies to villages, in all kinds of ways, like cyber cafes to like whatever, district like cyber court, blah, blah, blah. And also like a computer for every child, and many, many different kind of like things. And one of the big issues is that with access in general in India has been, even before AI, for example, has been that even with lower forms of technologies like PCs, you know, internet, projectors, right, those laptops, right, those devices, or even smartphones in today's world, even that level of technology, which was high obviously at a certain point and still is obviously, have not been, there are not great success stories from India when you talk about access to those forms of computing technologies that came before AI. And so the question of who gets access to AI is a very exponentially kind of far away situation in some sense. And I also wanted to say that one of the things that is interesting around access, which is on the positive side in some sense, and I was just hearing this on a podcast the other day, really good point, that we have to remember that, for example, fax machines are still sold today. And if you look at the numbers in America for business around fax machines, that business is still growing in 2025, right? So when you think about what that means, it kind of helps you understand that technologies don't cease to exist. The hype culture of certain technologies might make you believe that who uses a fax anymore, but
I was going to say, who
right?
uses a fax anymore?
But fax business is growing in North America, right? It's the highest it's ever been in the history of faxes.
Well, like worldwide or India?
Let's say in this case, North America, right? But the example just being that, for example, radios continue to exist, right? Radios service populations around the world. Radio has also made a comeback. Vinyl has made a huge comeback in the music scene more than ever before, right? Vinyl's being produced more, analog films being produced more. So in terms of technologies, the AI hype makes you believe that all of this is in the past. But when you talk about access, it's a very interesting opportunity to think about that there is a higher level of access that's possible with lower forms of technology today. And the real opportunity with technologies like AI is to help create those systems which repurpose existing technologies, which bring further power to what one might call antiquated technologies, but they're actually very current and very present. And so I think in India, the complication is to find that meaning in AI, which can supercharge existing technologies rather than use AI for AI's sake, basically.
So how do you supercharge a fax machines, by the way, like they're magic things, because you
Yeah.
put paper on one side and it comes out somewhere else on the other side. When I explained that to my kids for the first time, they were like, what? You put the paper in here and it comes out over there, like it's teletransportation.
Yeah.
You know, it's incredible. But how do you enhance a fax machine with AI?
No, I mean, how do you, it's
I'm
not about a fax.
curious.
I think the question on access is that how do you make sure that all the computers that exist and all the smartphones that exist or have existed in the last 15 years, which are not being used or are dumped or are lying in like government warehouses with nobody using them and projectors, how do you, and companies which have forced obsolescence, like for example, if you look at a brand like Samsung, what happens to all the Samsung brand phones that have not been sold in the last 10 years, right? What happens to that stuff? What happens to the laptops that HP has not managed to sell, and they have not managed to sell so many laptops, right? So there is this repository of hardware that is, because of the nature of the planned obsolescence that brands would be embarking on globally, that is just lying captive, and those represent, you know, GPU power, though they represent displays, they represent keyboards, they represent like input output devices, they represent Wi-Fi they represent all these sensors, speakers, everything is in there. So I think AI should be being used to, in some sense, figure out what do you do with it, because obviously people aren't like figuring out something
It seems
with
obvious,
it.
like they need to go to all of these other places which didn't have them, what you were talking about previously.
Yeah, but that's what's not
But
easy,
we don't
right?
want to. We don't have a problem with resources on this planet, basically. We have a problem of distribution.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And we don't want to distribute stuff.
So the politics of it seems to me like quite problematic. The reason being, like, unlike the previous, I take your point about like we have come to a new point in terms of technological inflection, but unlike any other time in the past, like the internet is still kind of owned by America, right? It comes out of an American
Yeah.
American.
Absolutely.
I don't know if there's Vijay Prashad, who's kind of a Marxist guy, and he made the point a few days ago. I don't know if it's true or not, but he says that the internet, where it comes in a giant, you know, set of cables from under the ocean up in Bombay, and he says it comes out in Bombay, and he's been to that place, the place. Only American citizens are allowed in.
Right.
Like so when you talk about like AI, is just one further iteration.
Yeah, absolutely.
No country in the world has had as many internet shutdowns in the last 2 or 3 years as India does.
Yeah.
I mean, whole parts of India, Kashmir, for example,
Just blacked out.
shut down the internet for 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about like reliance or even society turning itself a little bit more AI reliant, it creates huge problems of sovereignty, but also of access in India, right? So I don't necessarily think, I think this is one of the reasons why we all have to be super careful about being like gung-ho about like AI solving a lot of existing low-hanging fruit out there. I think quite often these solutions have proved worse than the problem in the last 20,
absolutely.
25 years, right?
Absolutely.
That's one of them.
Also, I mean, AI is not an oracle. Like, we shouldn't use AI to give us answers to problems that we know how to solve. Like, a lot of our problems we know very well out. Like, hunger, we know how to solve hunger. We just don't want to. I mean, that's the thing. And AI is not going to help solve these big problems, like, you know.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
So there's no money in it. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, climate crisis.
Absolutely.
We should not wait for AI to
Yeah.
give us solutions.
like
Yeah.
$36 billion or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
obviously, we should never do it.
Yeah.
So it's,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's the sad reality. Like, we have, I mean, AI is not going to solve the world's problems.
Yeah. Also, it's, I mean, on the positive side, most probably AI is like totally unsustainable anyways, and you'll never reach that point where you are able to talk about stuff like that. Because we just recently did so one of the tenants of this place, or a co-working people in this space with us, is a think tank called Digital Futures Lab. They're based out of Goa. They work primarily on AI and ethics and AI futures. And we've been working with them on an anthology of comics on the on the unintended consequences of generative AI. I'll put a link up later for this called Human in the Loop. We've done like 6 comics right now. And the most recent one, second most recent one was on the topic of data centers and rivers, right, which is one of the like very, very important and absolutely critical topics around climate and AI. And the numbers are staggering. And what's already there is, for example, evidence in the US about entire river systems being drained and dried up essentially by one data center in that locality. And now, of course, like I think Musk is building in Abu Dhabi in the desert, and all this kind of insane things happening. But with India, it's a huge problem as well, because our river systems are already in, as we all know, are in excellent shape, and they're going through a super crazy time, obviously. And having like data centers, and also like understanding that the Indian government is very gung-ho about AI. I don't know how much you might know about that, but there's a lot of like they're trying to build their own foundation model. They have this new thing called Bhashini and like other things building on top. I forgot the name of the LLM, but there's basically an Indian language LLM that the government's released with like I think trained on 12 or 13 languages. We had them here for a lab actually last year as well. But they want to build their own data centers. A company like Reliance, which you might have heard of, wants to build their own foundation model. They want to build their own data center. So it's going to be like most probably unsustainable. Like AI evolution might be unsustainable. And which is, I think, in some sense, good news to think about.
So training all of these models, like basically like separate models everywhere, it's insane. Like this is what takes the most, the electricity, what uses the most power is to train the foundation models. And we're just doing competition of foundation models all over the world. So basically, I mean, we could share them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where open source comes back into the question. Like open source could reduce drastically. Like if we all focused on developing the same model, why don't we? Again, we're hitting the same question, like profit, capitalism, it's always the same problem.
Yeah. Though I have, sorry, go ahead.
That's what's been happening. I mean, for example, when we're talking about open source that could run on any computer, so now we are again moving back to proprietary with all these GPUs that are, that are taking the whole stack and making it
absolutely.
Proprietary. So you cannot interact with it if you're coming from a different system.
Basically, NVIDIA right now has the chip.
No, but also I do have
more open than that, but still they have the chips.
But I do have I think towards what you're saying and kind of going deeper into that, which is I think a super critical idea of what's going on, is that the big criticism of open source is that open source does not exist anymore in the way that it was intended, in the visionary way that it was intended.
Because the large companies are Meta basically making the open source model.
Yeah, because open source has been basically, like if you look at if you look at the last 3 years, right, and you try to look at why do we have so much AI around us, like why did this scene actually explode 3 years back, is because the open source movement was essentially inverted upon itself to become a capitalist movement, and they used the learnings of the last 20 years in the open source movement, took those same frameworks and ideas and created a new kind of capitalism which cannot now exist without the open source movement, and the open source movement cannot exist without this, right, in turn, because the open source movement has so many holes in it, right? I mean, it was not fully evolved, like it was like on its way, let's say, right?
So who can you turn to? You'd think universities you might be able to turn to, but they're already co-opted anyway in the system.
I don't know if you remember Richard Stallman, he had said 30 years ago that this is what's going to happen if you let capitalists take control of open source. And he had said this 30 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Like GitHub and Microsoft is an easy example, right? Everyone knows that. I mean, that means that is like trillions of dollars of economic fortune for the next 100 years on GitHub, which is already captive with Microsoft right now, right? So I think the complicated part about, like, I think, for example, you might be familiar with Comfy UI as a platform. So for some of you who don't know, there's a platform that you should definitely check out called Comfy UI, like comfortable, comfy, and UI, which over the last 3 years, maybe 3-4 years, I would say, 3 years maybe, has become the de facto way of producing creative content. And but not in a way that it's mid-journey where you put a card and you get your subscription, right? It's basically often residing on your computer, like what Jonathan was mentioning. You don't need to be on the cloud always, but you can be. And it's basically a kind of a way to essentially construct your own AI pipeline for whatever you want to do, right? So it's an open framework where you have different boxes and nodes. You can connect and join the dots, and you can create your own system. So if you want to be, let's say I want to make a system by which I take a photograph here and I want to run the social media of this place. I can input 5 photographs, but I want like 3 different types of reels in different proportions. With this, you can essentially create your entire system so that I can just go home every day and upload 5 photographs and I get everything back in, right? But on the other hand, if I'm a 3D animator and I want 3D models that are animated, then I can just reconfigure the system to make 3D models from AI generated images, which will then be rigged with the mocap motion and will be rendered in a 360 way, whatever. If you want to do something else totally, you can be a writer if you want, you can do whatever you want. So it's kind of like one platform where you can do all of this stuff. This is not
more because you can do sound stuff.
Yeah, you can do everything, really. Any kind of activity
all
on any medium.
Models come out there.
Exactly.
All of the experimental new models.
Yeah. And this is all coming from, and it's a free open source platform, right? But the interesting thing when you go deeper into it, and not to get too geeky about it, but one of the really interesting things that I've found about it in more like simple terms is that inside these systems, you have access to all kinds of other systems. So in fact, even 2 months back, 1 month back, if you're noticing and following it, you will see that the hallucinations are dropping down, the guardrails are very high, the AI systems have learned from themselves because it's all about iterative kind of learning and innovation, and those mistakes are just down, down, down. You're not like GPT-5 scored, I think 100% on all the world's top exams, right? There's a test called Humanities Last, does someone know this name? Humanities Last Exam? Humanities Last Exam, right? So GPT-5, I think, scored like super high on that. This is the toughest exam, supposedly, or the toughest benchmark, let's say, for AI that existed. And it's very clear already that that benchmark doesn't work because you need higher benchmarks. And the minute it goes, and Humanities Last Exam, humans can't solve, right? Unless you're like some super brilliant, like whatever, right? And you can't. So there is a point where it goes beyond human abilities, and then the hallucinations you don't see them as that.
Sometimes there's a gap in how people who are using free AIs perceive it, people who are using paid AIs. Like the hallucinations you're talking about drop enormously when you move into $20 a month space, and again when you move into $200 a month space. So I mean, there's also this, like a lot of people are judging AI's capacities on what they have for free, and this is not where it is.
I mean, that's fair. It's just because the average person, or even if you take those small elements that we put in this school and say they won't have the resources to verify or to use GPT-5 in Raspberry Pi.
Very soon, bro. Very soon. They've just released also, I mean, sorry not to cut you off, but they, along with yesterday, they also released a low bandwidth LLM OpenAI release which can run without the internet, which is basically what you're talking about. Yeah, I mean, you can't stop that evolution of it. So the question is that what do you do with it still, right? In some sense, because I think it's a classic thing of saying that AI is going to keep making 6 or 7 hands when you ask for a visual of bullshit like stupid thing. It doesn't make 6 hands anymore. It makes 5 hands. You have to ask for 6 hands, it'll make 6. I just made a 6-handed artwork for a friend of mine because he wanted a 6-handed vintage artwork of old AI. So I had to say 6 hands, right? Then it gave me 6 hands. So it's a complicated thing, and even with visuals, because we were talking about visuals and stuff, 3 or 4 years back when Midjourney started, you couldn't sometimes tell the difference between an Indian person or like if you said Indian, it'll always be a North Indian woman in a sari, right? Like some kind of old Rajasthani painting, kind of exoticized woman from India. But today you can actually say northeast of India and you will get someone. You might not get a Nagaland and an Arunachal Pradesh today, but you will at least get a sense that, hey, okay, this person is from the northeast of India. There is some machine learning that's happened that has got those communities in there. You will get a Tamilian kind of person with brown, more duskier skin, with curlier hair, and you will get a Punjabi person with fairer and lighter eyes. You can get all that right now, right? And to your point about hallucinations, if you look at it from an art kind of perspective, like in this visual way, it's very easy to see that those hallucinations are going down and down. It's not where it should be, obviously, but if I was in North America, I could easily get any kind of Caucasian North American person I wanted. If I was a North American, I would be able to access my entire community through AI right now. I can get a blonde, I can get a brunette, I can get at any age, whatever you want, whatever clothes, any kind of clothing. So it's important to kind of think that it's going that fast.
But try to generate somebody from Lesotho that you can't get.
From where?
Lesotho,
sure.
South Africa, in Southern Africa.
Yeah.
Because I was working on a project there, and they were trying to generate portraits of people from Lesotho. And no, they're getting Kenyans, they're getting other Africans. It's like Africa is one thing in the image models right now.
Yeah.
That will change.
It will.
Change. And Lesotho is so tiny that it will be the last. But Like,
Sure.
But
yeah. No, it's an important point because I think, yeah, go ahead, please.
The LoRa adapters come in.
Question of whose agency is being exercised in training these models through a data system.
Yes, absolutely. But the point is that India is also making its own models, right? Everybody wants to make their own models, and there are, in the general world of AI, like I think, I forgot his name, Vivek's son, or like what he was talking about techno-feudalism, in some sense it's already there. There are only 3, 4, 5 companies in the world that will govern what's happening. Everybody else is building, like for example, if you follow the Indian founder of Perplexity, forgot his name, but he's like really great at like when he talks about like wrappers and things like that. And it's very clear that most of the world, 99% of the world will just be a wrapper on top of the one person that owns the core technology. And that core technology might be an LLM, it might be a graphic card, it might be a computer, it might be a motherboard, but essentially when you go along the vertical slice of a technology, at every level there are only 2, 3 players. So those 15 to 20 people, everybody else is the 99% just working on top like vultures, eating from this kind of like pile of carcasses basically. That's kind of what a depressing viewpoint of that is.
Even Anthropic is starting to struggle to keep up.
Yeah.
With OpenAI,
Absolutely.
with even Grok, which is quite big. Even Google are getting there now, which they were so far behind for ages.
Yeah.
And now their models are starting.
And also Meta, it's just the same 4, 5 companies. It's not going to change like.
It's always the same big companies.
But it's a question of like, as artists, the ethics thing is again obviously going back to that a little bit. It's important because I have this project called Elsewhere in India, which is looking at AI as a very central part of the narrative. It's talking about what happens when in the future, 50 years from now, in a post-AI world, and it has a central character who's a cyborg, who stands for this idea of AI for cultural good, and we're trying to, through her, explore what does it mean to say, what does the phrase AI for cultural good mean, right? Is it just a perverse kind of way to like create an art project, or is there a way that is there even a possibility of saying something like that or to manifest that? And it brings you to like a certain point, and because we've showed this project around the world, I also have come to this realization that ethics are also a geopolitical kind of culturally located idea, right? Like what is ethics about, like from a decolonial lens, for example, right? Why, there is a very valid question that why can't I have access, even if it's unethical in a global way, why can't I have access sitting in India to all of the world's artworks from all the galleries in Italy and all the things made in the UK? Why can't I have access to that in a button? And can I create a system where they do not have that same access from my artworks or our artworks, let's say, right? So there is an aspect of like, and not coming at it from a negative point of view of saying that, okay, you colonized us, now we'll colonize you. But there is an aspect of decolonial and colonial thinking in current AI systems as far as creativity goes. And I think the voices of creators in India, in the global south, are often not heard in the same way as the voices of creators in the global north are. And I think there's a lot of value in the kind of voices and opinions around ethics and around the framing of this ethic that can come from artists in the subcontinent. And I think one can find like different boundaries and thresholds for those ethics and different ways of qualifying them. Like for example, if you look at this idea of like repatriation, right? If you go back to this idea of museums and heritage and stuff we were talking about earlier, like repatriation is a very big theme in Indian museum culture right now, especially because most of our really great objects are in Britain and also around the world, obviously, either stolen in one way or the other or acquired. Now the question is, nobody's giving those back. Very small.
British in particular don't want
Yeah, British don't do. I mean, then there are obviously.
Even France is doing that.
Yeah, even Holland is doing. I mean, and to be fair, there are sophisticated museums, I would say, around the world who understand that this is an important thing to do, or it shows them in very poor light, and the optics of like repatriation are very important in the current age. So, but the fact is that repatriation may or may not happen, right? So then the question becomes that, okay, if physical repatriation doesn't happen, what is digital repatriation? And can a technology like AI or a kind of collective set of technologies which constitute AI or generative AI, can they help in some ways to digitally repatriate our population of artists with their heritage of object culture, right? Without the museum object ever coming to me.
I mean, there's quite a few projects about 3D scanning artworks.
Yes, there are. Yeah, 5 minutes. Okay, yeah, we're done almost. Absolutely. There's a lot of great examples, but in the world of AI, right, you're not doing the 3D scanning in some sense, right? You're saying that through machine learning and through the advancement of LLMs and more progressive sort of data sets, let's say, and more interesting projects in what those data sets could be, one could arrive at a point where you don't even need to do 3D scanning anyways. You can access and create, let's say I want a pillar from whatever, 15th century temple in Orissa, right, and east of India. Then I'm able to like get that pillar for myself with my additions to it, and I'm able to 3D print it. I don't need any museum anymore, and I don't need those objects anymore. I don't need 3D scanning anymore, right?
But they should still come back. Yeah.
But they are coming back.
It's not the same. Like,
I mean, it is the same. It is the same.
It's not though, exactly.
What's different? I mean, if I have a robot, for example, if you looked at some of you might be familiar with this project in Italy. I forgot the mine, the marble, the marble quarries where Michelangelo and all these guys would have like got the marble from. Caravaggio in Italy, I don't know. Sorry? Yeah, I forgot the name. There's a specific quarry, right, which has been used for the greatest marble sculptures for the last 500 years. It's one place. They've all gone there and got their marble from there, right? Now, there's a new company there which is made of robots near Florence, and they take the marble from the same place, but robots do the carving. And what they've done is they're working with machine learning of Italian sculptures, but trying to now, and it's incredible, you guys should look at it, the videos look like crazy. It's just these insane new age robots with, sculpting these giant marble statues. Now the question is that in that, like, if you can do that with marble, then why, well, like, let's say I want a pillar from, from Jaipur, I want a sandstone ornate pillar, and I have a robot in like Delhi that doesn't even need sandstone anymore. I can 3D print, and my robot can either print or carve the same pillar that existed in the 14th century, which doesn't exist anymore except it's broken in somebody's private home. I can have exactly the same pillar and the same material, right?
So the question really is, what
value the same sort of?
I don't know. You tell me. Would you value it?
Psychologically speaking, people, if you do not tell someone that this sculpture or whatever painting is not done by an AI, it's quite likely that the person will be fooled and will relish it, will enjoy it.
Yeah.
But the moment you psychologically, the moment you tell someone that it's made by robots, it's quite likely that you will appreciate the value of it.
Maybe, I mean, that's it.
It might be exactly the same.
Maybe. I mean, that's a great.
same with old stuff, like the old.
But maybe not.
Enjoy the flaws of artists as well.
What if the robot made all the flaws that it wanted?
And yet,
Because flaws are not an easy thing to not replicate.
Flaws, don't worry.
People also want that a human will. Right now, we look at more of artisans
Right.
trying to do work rather than robots, even though it is cheaper.
No, but what if it was, for example, a jali from, like, say, Hyderabad? They have, forgot the name of the complex, where they have some of the world's most beautiful, exquisite jali work in stone, which can't be replicated in today's wealth. Even with the wealth, you can't replicate a lot of it, right? So what if the robot could give you that thing that you can't even access with a human artist today?
But everyone will have it, but everyone.
No, would it? No, but what if it sold for? No, the craft people who made this thing never made money. Those pillars are not so expensive at all. That's it.
People who sold it made more money.
No, the king had money and he made people work for it. I mean, do it for free or whatever, right? Or as a part of like the Narega movement of the 15th century, essentially, right? No, I'm not trying to contest your point. I'm just trying to provoke it a bit more because it is a very interesting question. Because why is something valuable, right?
Our perception of it.
Right. But you can have, but in